I'm Carolyn Jane Camara Montgomery. My father was came to this country when he was 3 years old. There were a lot of people from the Azores that settled in Little Compton in the Fall River area. I grew up on Red Top Farm. It is located right across the road from where I live now. My father ran the farm for the Sheriff family. We lived in the garage apartment upstairs. We always had furnace heat, electricity, but I had school friends that still had kerosene lanterns in Little Compton. They didn't all have them at one time, but we were lucky to live on somebody that had, furnaces and electricity. My best years of my life was living on that farm, and lived there till I was 16, and then we moved up West Main Road in our own home, my grandmother's home. We had cows, we had sheep at times. During the war, with sheep, we were out on the front lawn. There was a vast lawn. Instead of using gasoline, which we couldn't get very much in the war, the sheep took care of that. We had the run of the yard, but we could play anywhere in the farm, up in the barn, up in the sheds and everything. But there was a black farm cat, and we were not allowed to bring him home into the house. So he was an outside cat, and he lived there for a long, long time. It was fairly mechanized farm in the 1940s during the war. They had 2 horses, and that was used to bring in the hay and work the fields until later years. They had the tractors and more things. But we had a lot of opportunities to just go to the river for a swim. It was right down to the water. Downstairs in the garage where we lived, upstairs. It's a national organization of farm people mostly, but it has died out now. But there's still a group in my granddaughter's in Pennsylvania that they have 4-H clubs. It was mostly Little Compton and Tiverton, and we would do different things with 4-H, and we would have demonstration of how we cooked something and things like that. We had hens, we had all the eggs we wanted, all the milk and the cream we wanted. It was a wonderful childhood. During the war, the grain bags came in floured, printed material, and so we would wash those and use those to sew things during the war because we have sewed a lot of our own clothes. That's how I learned to sew, was from my mother on a treadmill sewing machine. And to this day, I enjoy sewing. That was one of the things during the war that was affected. We had to keep the shades down on all the windows so that the airplanes going over couldn't see Little Compton as well. You had to cover the tops of your headlights on the cars so that it didn't show up. So it was always afraid that the enemy plane was going to come. And an enemy submarine was sunk off the coast of Rhode Island during the war. We didn't know it at the time, but we have heard that since in history. Have you heard that too? We moved when the farm I was 16 when we moved from there. It is at West Main Road, south of Rocker's Fruit Stand. Part of that fruit stand was part of the farm. It extended all the way up there and went to the river. And up behind where I live now is a holly grove. And Mr. Scherer, he lost his wife in 1935, and he remarried for a short time, and then that didn't work. So he would go up there and sit and just think about his wife, and he made a memorial holly grove there. And my father and his helper planted thousands of evergreen trees there, which are huge right now. But it was preserved, and now it's broken up into house lots because the descendants of the Scherer family each had a piece of it. There were 6 children, and they little by little have sold it off. So it's sad to see that happen, but that's life, I guess. My father bought the land across the street that went up to the Holly Grove. It was the Sisson farm, and the last person died there, and he was able to get this farm, and he gave each of his 6 grandchildren 2 acres. That's why they live here now. It isn't the same because it's so expensive here. But, I met my husband when I was working for the Navy as a stenographer, and we were married in 1952, and we lived in Jacksonville, Florida, for about a year and a half. Wayne was born there. Susan was born here before we left. And so when he was medically retired, we returned to Little Compton and rented for a while until we built our home. So that's how I'm still here. I'm very active in many organizations. It's the Garden Club, and I'm on the board of the Little Compton Historical Society. And then I volunteer for the Circle of Friends every month for handicapped young and older adults. They come from age probably in their early 20s to over 80. Their caregivers come in with them, and they have a program, and then they have dinner, and we help serve that. I've done that for many years. My children, one lives in Newport, and the other one is Wayne Montgomery, who is a local farmer at Peckham's farm, and since he was a little boy, he was always over at Jane Cabot's milking barn. He had to watch those cows milk, and then he'd bring my milk home in the little bucket every other day or so, and that's what we had. We had raw milk until we moved from that house. The Garden Club started in 1975. A group of women decided that maybe we could start a garden club. There was a Little Compton Garden Club. And we met at Barbara Madden's house. And there was probably 6 or 7 of us. And we decided, well, maybe this is a good idea. And from that, we've grown to 55 members, and about twice that, no, more than that, are associate members that, as they, for one reason or other, they couldn't do the work that we did. We did a lot of manual work. We didn't hire much, and it was a small group. I can remember when I was president twice, and we did a lot of the work ourselves. We'd order the mulch, and we'd mulch it, and we take care of the Brownell Rose Gardens at the Brownell House, and we do the triangle at Birch's Corner, and we have a demonstration meadow garden at the ball field, athletic field there. So we're pretty darn active. We decorate the lampposts around the commons, and they started to bring one down on the lamppost in Adamsville, I understand, and we make them, and then the town maintenance men put them up on the things for us. So, and we usually have a tree in the tree spree. My uncle put me on one of the horses, and what happened? The horse started running for the barn, and I'm sitting there. I'm about 5 or 6 years old. I don't know how I didn't fall off. And we got to the barn, and he was happy until everybody hurriedly came up and wondered. I don't know how I stayed on that horse, because those horses are pretty wide. They're not a riding horse. That was one event that I had. Another one was I decided I was going to trap for skunks, because there was a man down the road, a Mr. Grinnell, and he'd give you 50 cents if it was a good one. If it was a lot of white on it, it might not be that much. So I went down. My father helped me. We went down to the battlefield. One of the fields was called the battlefield, and it was a huge rock wall. So he helped me. We set it. I don't even know what I put in it. He must have known what to put in. Well, first thing you know, I caught a skunk. And so my father went down, and brought it home. Well, I was going to take the bus into Fall River, because we had a bus service. It would come down in the morning twice, and then twice come back. And I thought, I don't think I should be on the bus because I think I still smell like skunk. But it was fun. And I took it down to Mr. Grinnell, and he gave me the money for it. Well, they were a menace. I just decided I thought I'd like to try to I have done a few extra different things. I only got that one. That's all. I didn't do it anymore. Yeah, he gave me, I don't know if it was 50 cents. If it was a lot of white, it didn't get good. If there's a lot of black on it, it was better. I always knew that, but I tried my hand at most anything. Oh my gosh. Well, one thing we used to love was when they came to bale and thresh the wheat or the rye, and then they had the bales. So then they had to get the bales into a group, and so they would put a rope around them and pull them over to a group, and build it up so they could load them into the barn. And that was even done with horses, but they eventually had. And of course, you always had haystacks to begin with. You didn't have a baler. The haystacks, they would get all into rows, and then they would cache the hay. They call it cache. Put a rope around it, pull it to the where you're going to build the haystack. My father was the stacker, so he's up there, and the men have to throw the hay up to him. And then when they get finished, comes to a point. Then they put a net over it with stones to hold it down. And then all winter, when they needed hay, they would have to go out and get it and bring it in. In later years, they baled it and put it up above the barn, and it was stored there. And there was a drop in front of the cows that they could put the hay down, and there was one in the middle of the barn where the horses were stalled, and they would throw down there. So we would climb up the ladder on the side of the barn and go up there and either hide for hide and seek or sardines, whatever game we were playing. Sardines is like one person's hides, and you all have to try to find it, but you don't let anybody else know when you find it until everybody's found you. Okay. That's kind of the opposite. I used to like to go ice skating on the ponds. Boddington's had a pond. It's all grown in. I never went too far down the South Shore where that pond occasionally freezes. But I used to like to ice skate. And Jane Cabot's farm, they had a pond too, but they're letting it grow up, so it won't be a pond anymore. You can't open a pond unless you have cattle and you're using it. Then you can keep it open. Don't let the grass grow in, and you can't tell this one on Simmons Road. It's there just before you come from the Catholic Church. It's on your left. You can't see it. But there was a big pond there. That's where they used to cut ice. Well, they didn't have electricity for refrigerators, so they would cut in blocks of ice there. They had a little house there that they would store some, and they would pack it in a house, and it would stay for a while. And that was done there. But later years, Lewis Rogers had an ice business, and he would go to Fall River and pick up ice and come back and deliver it. Now, the first house I lived in, Little Compton, was only an ice refrigerator, an ice box. And you had to order ice, and he would bring it in and put it in the top of the ice box. And that's what you had to keep your food cold. I'm not sure whether they ever took ice off of the Adamsville pond. They may have, but it has to stay still for quite a while. Well, I used to go up Peckham Road, there was one. And then there was one, like I say, in the Cabot, right near the road. And then there used to be a place between the Sheriff Farm and the next house south, out by the road. It would fill in with a little bit of ice. It was like 3 or 4 inches deep. And it was quite a little distance. We used to skate there too. And my sister Bobby and I would. I don't think my sister Janie ever did. One thing, Mr. Sheriff told us, that was the man that owned the farm. He said, if you want to make some money, I'll pay you 10 cents a row of rows of carrots. And they wanted you to pick between them so that they'd grow bigger. So 10 cents a row, and those rows were long. My sister and I, Bobby, did that. Well, we only did it one time, because it was a lot of work picking and picking through a long row but that was one thing that I remembered. Oh, there were old chicken houses on the farm, and they were empty. And the Emery boys, they're twin boys that came down every summer from Providence, and they were our ages. So we would fix up one of the houses for a playhouse, and then we'd fix up another little building for another playhouse. So we did that when we were 10 or 11, 12, 13 years old. Now, maybe not quite that little. But we had a lot of fun with the Emery boys. They would come up and play games with us, and things on the summertime when they came. And we still are in contact with one of the wives and we had a lot of good times with them. Yeah, they were bunkers. They had. I remember when the Army moved in here, the sentry to the opening is still there. You can see it from the road. They had them places. There was one on Willow Avenue. There was people that would go up on Peckham Road up the top of the hill coming into Long Highway, and that my aunt would go there. They would spot planes. And I went one time with her when she was doing that. You volunteered for so many hours to do that. And then there was one down on Heffenreffer Farm. They were scattered. And as they built the buildings for the men to stay in, and the officers had a building right. The first house on your left when you go into Warrens Point Road was one of where the officers came in. But they had a movie theater there, and my dad would take us down, Bobby and I would. For 15 cents, we saw all the best movies that were out. On the left-hand side down when you go past, where Fort Church is all houses now, but there was a big building down there, and they showed all the latest movies. So my dad would take us there for 15 cents. That was a treat. I did remember, and it's just had a picture of the 16-inch gun. And I think probably people have told you that. By living on West Main Road, we found out that this thing was coming down one night. And so we ran down to the end of the road. It was a little distance. I mean, you could see it. About dusk, it started coming down. And it was so slow. It was just about creeping down. And I was told just recently that they ran into a bridge coming over from Providence area or something, and that was stalled for a while. But we witnessed that. I'll always remember that. It was dusk, and it was going down the road just slowly. And it was pretty long, I'll tell you. Oh, Jane Cabot's parents lived, and they took their farm.
Wow.
Yeah, the Army bought all of that, and they took the farm over. So there were a lot of things that the Army just came, and many of the people, the young girls, some of them married those that had come here, that were stationed here, and that place was used for Brownell roses to store. It was supposed to be the perfect place for them. It was cool, and when I worked for the post office, just before as I started, I remember them bringing them in, bound up and shipping all over the United States. And I can remember they did that for quite a few years. But then Mr. Brownell passed away, and then his son was running it, and eventually there were none. This next year, the Little Compton Garden Club is doing a big a story about the Brownell house, the Brownell roses. I have 2 of them. My father must have bought them, and they were planted across the street. And when we sold that property to the Ag Trust, I moved them to they're just plain yellow Brownell roses, but they grow them every year. And it's nice to know. And Wayne told me, my son told me, that they took all of the root for developing that from wild rose at a field up and back of the Almies on West Main Road. And that's where they took the original roots to and developed Brownell rose. I love Little Compton because it's a well-run town. Everyone that moves here loves to be here. We do a lot to keep it that way. I am a little sad that my grandchildren can't live here because they cannot afford to live here. If they didn't have it given to them, there's nothing that a working man can do to live here. And that's the sad part of it. It's just become, if it isn't $1 million, and those things are not for the working man. And I think that it's hard for people working here, keep work here, because there's no place for them to stay. They have to commute. But we've kept it little as long as we could. And I'm hoping that things will change, but I can't see it changing.